Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to take the lofty and, let's be honest, sometimes intimidating world of moral philosophy and transform it into a highly practical toolbox. We all face difficult decisions every single day, right? From the boardroom to the dinner table. So today, we're going to build a framework to help you navigate those choices with complete confidence.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we're defining exactly what ethics is. Second, we'll break down the big three historical theories. Third, we're exploring some additional ethical lenses. And finally, we'll build a step-by-step decision framework you can start using immediately. All right, part one. What exactly is ethics? Let's separate fact from fiction and clear up some common misconceptions right out of the gate. To truly understand ethics, we actually first have to understand what it's not. The Santa Clara University Marcula Center points out that ethics is definitely not just following your feelings. I mean, if we did that, we'd probably eat ice cream for every meal and completely ignore our responsibilities. It's also not the same as religion. While religious traditions absolutely offer high ethical standards, plenty of non-religious people act ethically, and sadly, religious people can sometimes act unethically. Also, ethics isn't simply following the law. History is full of laws that were ethically corrupt or just designed to serve narrow interests. It's not about following culturally accepted norms either, because those can often be unethical themselves. And finally, ethics is not science. Science can give us vital data and tell us what's technologically possible, but it absolutely cannot tell us what we ought to do. So what is it then? Well, Dr. Wilson Jose gives us this beautiful definition in his Introduction to Ethics. He describes it as the systematic reflective study of human conduct. The word actually comes from the Greek word ethos, which means character or habit. Basically, it's the study of the values and guidelines by which we live. It's all about finding out what is good, how to get it, and ultimately how to achieve that deep, fulfilling happiness the Greeks called eudaimonia. I absolutely love the analogy Dr. Jose uses here. He says morality is a lot like nutrition. Just like nutrition focuses on nourishing our physical health, even if a healthy diet doesn't give you that immediate sugary satisfaction, morality is concerned with our moral health. It's there to help us figure out what actions and habits will deeply nourish our lives in the long run and what's going to slowly poison them. Moving on to part two, the big three ethical theories. We're looking at the agent, the act, and the outcome to see how historically philosophers have tried to answer the big question: why be moral? Over the centuries, this has really boiled down to three major schools of thought. First up, we have virtue ethics, which started in ancient Greece with Aristotle. Now, this theory focuses entirely on the agent, the person actually performing the action. Aristotle argued that true happiness comes from living a virtuous life. So it's not just about doing good things, it's about literally being a good person. Virtues are those dispositions and habits that let us act at our absolute highest potential. We're talking traits like courage, compassion, and honesty. When you're faced with a choice, virtue ethics asks you, what kind of person will I become if I do this? Second is deontology, championed heavily by the 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant. Unlike virtue ethics, deontology focuses on the act itself. Kant insisted that actions are inherently right or wrong, totally regardless of their consequences. It's all about duties, rules, and obligations. For a strict deontologist, if you have a duty to tell the truth, you must always tell the truth. No exceptions whatsoever, even if lying might literally save the day. It's about respecting the moral rule above all else. And third, we have utilitarianism, which was introduced by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill around the late 18th and early 19th centuries. This theory focuses purely on the outcome, or the consequences of an action. A utilitarian approaches ethics almost like a cold, hard math problem. Which action produces the greatest balance of good over harm for the greatest number of people? It's a totally results-based approach that makes us measure the likelihood of a specific result and its broad impact on everyone involved. So, when you're faced with a tough dilemma, these three theories can pull you in completely different directions. Virtue asks, who should I be? Deontology asks, what is my duty? And utilitarianism asks, what brings the best result? Each one gives you a totally different focal point for your moral reasoning. Let's jump into part three, exploring additional ethical lenses, and expand our view a bit. What's super interesting here is how we can take this theoretical foundation and turn it into practical lenses. Think of it literally like being at the optometrist office. You can swap these lenses out to view real-world problems from entirely different angles. The Mercola Center for Applied Ethics actually takes those big three theories and expands them into a much wider toolkit.
They suggest framing these philosophies as lenses to help us perceive ethical dimensions that you and I might otherwise be totally blind to in our crazy, fast-paced daily lives.
So, on top of the virtue and utilitarian perspectives, they introduce a few more. First, there's the rights lens, which focuses on protecting human dignity and the moral right to be treated as an end, not just a means to an end. Then we have the justice lens, which focuses on fairness and ensuring people are given their due, whether that's distributive or restorative justice. We've also got the common good lens, which looks at the shared conditions that are important to everyone's welfare, things like clean air or a fair legal system. And finally, the care ethics lens. This one is rooted in relationships, empathy, and interdependence, reminding us to listen and respond to individuals in their specific circumstances, instead of just coldly calculating utility. The real magic happens when you swap these lenses back and forth. By doing that, you don't just rely on a single rigid dogma. Instead, you build a really deep, holistic appreciation of everyone involved in a dilemma. For example, you might look at a business decision and say, well, the utilitarian lens says this makes the most money for the most shareholders. But wait, the care ethics lens reveals it absolutely devastates the local community. It's a real game changer. And that brings us to part 4, framework for ethical decisions. Let's put all this into practice and funnel this rich philosophy into a concrete, step-by-step toolbox you can use at work, at home, or in your community. This excellent 5-step process from the Marculus Center maps out a highly reliable path for decision-making. You identify the issue, gather the facts, evaluate using your lenses, make and test your choice, and then implement and reflect on the outcome. Let's break these down real quick. Kicking things off with steps 1 and 2, you've got to explicitly ask who might be damaged or benefited by a decision. Is this more than just a question of what's legal or efficient? Then you need to get the facts. What do we actually know? What facts are missing? Have all the relevant groups been consulted? You simply cannot make a good ethical decision in an information vacuum. Then, in step 3, things get really interesting. You evaluate your alternative actions by running them through those ethical lenses we just went over. Which option respects rights? Which treats people fairly? Which produces the most good and the least harm? Which serves the common good? And which option leads you to act as the sort of person you genuinely want to be? Once you weigh those lenses and pick an option, step 4 requires you to test it. This is sometimes called the public audience test. Ask yourself honestly, if I told a mentor I deeply admire, or even my grandmother, about this specific choice I'm about to make, what would they say? If you'd hesitate to defend it out loud, it might be time to rethink the whole shebang. Finally, step 5. You implement your decision with the greatest care for all stakeholders, and then you reflect on how it turned out. As the source material points out, making good ethical decisions requires practiced sensitivity. Reflecting on those outcomes is how you build your ethical analysis muscles, which eventually turns these deliberate steps into an automatic, totally natural habit. To wrap up this explainer, I'm going to leave you with an incredibly powerful question drawn straight from the virtue lens. The next time you're faced with a heavy, complex decision, before you do anything else, just pause and ask yourself, is this action consistent with my acting at my best? Thank you so much for joining me, and I really hope this explainer helps you navigate your world with just a little more clarity.